He didn't break my door down. He waited until my own signature opened it for him.
At 75, Martha Hart was thrown out of her own home before breakfast, not by strangers, by the man who once promised to protect her. Her ex-husband, Raymond, stood on the porch in West Plains, Missouri, calm, clean-shirted, and holding the paperwork that stole the life she built room by room. Martha had one suitcase beside her, one legal notice in her hand, and one old brass key that had opened that front door for 38 years, until that morning. Raymond did not shout. He did not look guilty. He only said the words that made her knees weaken. "You signed it, Martha." That was how he did it, not with a fist, not with a threat, with trust, with signatures, with papers she believed were meant to protect their future. That night, with nowhere to sleep, Martha drove into the Ozark hills toward Grandma Ruth's abandoned cabin, the one Raymond always called worthless. But behind one loose wallboard, Grandma had left a letter. And the first sentence broke Martha in half. "Before Martha opens that letter, subscribe. Because if this kind of betrayal does not bother us enough to stay, then maybe Raymond was right about one thing. People do look away." The morning Martha Hart lost her home, one sentence kept echoing louder than the slammed door behind her. "You signed it, Martha." Raymond had said it calmly, almost kindly, as if 38 years of trust could be reduced to one signature on one page. Martha sat in her old Buick at the edge of the driveway, her suitcase leaning against the passenger seat, the legal notice folded in her lap. The brass key was still in her palm. She kept squeezing it, as if pressure alone could make it useful again. But the key was finished. The house was finished. At least, that was what Raymond wanted her to believe. Because Raymond Hart did not begin by taking Martha's home. He began by taking small decisions out of her hands. At first, it looked like care. He paid bills before she saw the envelopes. He answered calls from the bank. He sat across from loan officers with his sleeves rolled up, nodding like a man who understood every line of fine print. And Martha let him. Not because she was foolish, because she was married. Because she believed a home was something two people protected together. Back then, the house outside West Plains, Missouri, still felt safe. Morning light fell across the kitchen floor. Geraniums sat in clay pots by the porch steps. Martha had painted that porch rail herself every spring, slow and careful, one brushstroke at a time. That house was not fancy, but it was hers in all the ways that mattered. So when Raymond first brought home the papers, Martha did not see a trap. She saw responsibility. He laid the pages on the kitchen table beside a glass of sweet tea. The print was small. The language was cold: refinance, equity, adjustment, security. Raymond tapped the signature line. "Lower payments," he said. "Better terms. A smarter future." Martha looked at him. He smiled. Not warmly, confidently, like her doubt was the only problem in the room. "You worry too much," he said. So she signed. The first time, her hand was steady. The next time, less so. More papers followed over the years. A home equity loan Raymond said would fix the roof. An ownership adjustment he claimed married couples did all the time. A financial agreement, he said, would protect them both if things ever got complicated. He never called it control. He called it planning. He never called it pressure. He called it trust. And whenever Martha asked if someone else should look over the papers, Raymond's face cooled just enough to make the room smaller. After all these years, he would say, "You still don't trust me?" That question always reached the tenderest part of her. So Martha signed again, and the papers disappeared into Raymond's locked metal cabinet in the back room. Grandma Ruth noticed that cabinet before anyone else did. One Sunday afternoon, years before the divorce, Ruth sat at Martha's kitchen table with her purse in her lap. Raymond had stepped onto the porch to take a phone call, but the screen door was open just enough for his voice to slip through. "No," Raymond said quietly, "the house is handled. But the cabin land is still in her family name." Martha barely heard it. Grandma Ruth heard every word. Her eyes moved from the porch to the locked cabinet, then back to Martha. A moment later, Raymond lowered his voice even more. "If Ruth passes before she changes anything, there may still be a way." The kitchen went still. Even the faucet seemed too loud. Martha turned from the sink with a wet dish in her hand, but Grandma Ruth had already looked away. She did not want Raymond to know she had heard him. That afternoon, when Ruth was leaving, she held Martha's hand longer than usual. Her thumb brushed over Martha's wedding ring. Then she said softly, "A woman can love a man and still keep her eyes open." Martha gave a tired little smile, but Ruth did not smile back. She only looked toward the road where Raymond's truck sat shining in the sun. Then she said something Martha would not understand for years. "One day, baby, you may need a place that still knows your real name." By sunset, Grandma Ruth was back at her cabin in the Ozark hills, and before she even took off her coat, she pulled an old deed box from beneath her bed, opened a drawer full of yellowed papers, and wrote Martha's name on an envelope Raymond would spend years wishing he had found first. Grandma Ruth did not turn on the radio that night. She usually liked the sound of old gospel music filling the cabin after dark. It made the place feel less lonely when the wind moved through the Ozark trees. But that night, quiet felt necessary. She needed to hear herself think. The envelope with Martha's name sat on the kitchen table, still empty. Beside it was the old deed box Ruth kept beneath her bed. Its brass latch was worn smooth from years of being opened, checked, and closed again. Ruth had always believed paper remembered what people tried to deny: receipts, maps, signatures, dates. They looked harmless until the wrong person needed them buried. Raymond's voice still pressed against her mind. "The house is handled." He had said it like a man discussing a business deal. Not a marriage, not a woman, a deal. And then came the other sentence: "The cabin land is still in her family name." Ruth had heard enough. By sunrise, she was dressed in her gray coat, moving slowly but with purpose. She packed the deed box into the back seat of her old sedan and drove down the narrow road toward West Plains. The town was just waking up. A delivery truck idled near the grocery store. A man swept leaves from the sidewalk outside the pharmacy. The courthouse flag snapped in the morning wind. Ruth parked in front of a small brick law office with a green awning. Alden Price, attorney at law. She sat in the car for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. Then she whispered, "Lord, let me be wrong," but she carried the box inside anyway. Alden Price had known Ruth for years. He smiled when he first saw her, but the smile faded when she placed the deed box on his desk. "Ruth," he said, "what are we protecting?" That question almost undid her, because the answer was not land, not really. It was Martha. Ruth sat across from him and told him only what mattered. Raymond's questions, the locked cabinet, the way Martha had grown quieter. The way Raymond spoke about property like love was something to be calculated. She did not exaggerate. She did not cry. She simply laid out the pattern. Alden listened until his pen stopped moving. Then Ruth said the sentence she had been carrying all night. Not the kind of danger that leaves bruises. The kind that leaves signatures. The room changed after that. Alden pulled the deed box closer. Together, they looked through tax records, boundary maps, and old property papers. He asked questions Ruth answered carefully. Some answers made him frown. Some made him remove his glasses and rub the bridge of his nose. By noon, he was no longer speaking like a family friend. He was speaking like a lawyer. "There are ways to make this harder for him," he said. Ruth looked toward the window. Outside, a young couple crossed the street holding hands. For one second, she thought of Martha as a girl, running barefoot across the cabin porch, laughing with blackberry stains on her fingers. Then she looked back at Alden. "Make it hard," she said. He prepared papers Ruth did not fully explain to anyone afterward. She signed them slowly, carefully. The way a woman signs something meant to outlive her. When Ruth returned to the cabin, the light was already fading behind the trees. She made coffee she barely drank. Then she opened the empty envelope and wrote Martha's full name across the front. Martha May Whitcomb Hart. Not just Hart, Whitcomb too, the name Martha had before Raymond. The name Ruth wanted the law to remember. She wrote the first page of the letter that night, stopping often because some truths hurt more once they became ink. Then she folded it, slid it into the envelope, and hid it behind the loose wallboard near the fireplace. Her hand stayed pressed against the wood for a long time, like she was sealing a promise. But Ruth did not sleep afterward. because inside the deed box, beneath the maps Alden had already seen, was one county record she had kept back. A record showing Raymond Hart's name beside a parcel number tied to land he had sworn he never cared about. By the time Martha drove away from the house, the morning had turned painfully bright. That felt wrong. A day like that should have come with thunder, with dark clouds, with wind hard enough to shake the windows. But the sun kept shining over West Plains like nothing had happened. Neighbors rolled trash bins back from the curb. A school bus groaned through the intersection. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower started up, steady and careless. The world had not paused. Not even for a woman who had just lost the place that carried her whole life. Martha kept both hands on the steering wheel. Her suitcase sat on the passenger seat, buckled in like someone she was trying not to lose. The folded legal notice rested on top of it. She did not open it again. She did not need to. The words were official. The wound was not. At the first red light, Martha looked down and realized the old brass key was still in her hand. She had driven several blocks without letting it go. The teeth of it had pressed a red mark into her palm. She placed it in the cup holder, then picked it back up. Some things are hard to put down, even after they no longer open anything. She thought about calling someone, a cousin in Springfield, a woman from church, her niece near Mountain Home. But every name came with a weight. One would ask why she signed the papers. One would offer prayer, then distance. One would say Martha could stay for a few nights, and Martha would hear the unspoken part, not too long. At 75, needing help carried a different kind of shame. People did not always say you were a burden. Sometimes they just cleared a corner and made sure you knew it was temporary. So Martha kept driving. Outside town, she stopped at a gas station and bought coffee she did not want. The young cashier called her Mom without looking up. Martha carried the cup back to the car and sat there with both hands around it. The coffee burned her palms. She was grateful for the pain. It gave her something small and honest to feel. By late afternoon, she parked outside a closed diner near the highway. The sign in the window said, "See you Monday," though it was only Thursday. Red stools sat upside down on the counter. A fly tapped against the inside of the glass. Martha stayed in the car. Trucks passed. The sky lowered. The legal notice slid from the suitcase onto the floorboard, but she left it there. Then she opened her purse and searched for her medication. Instead, she found small pieces of a life she had not meant to carry, a folded sweater receipt, a church bulletin, an old photograph of Grandma Ruth standing on a cabin porch, one hand raised against the sun, and behind it, a postcard. Martha did not remember saving it. The picture showed Grandma Ruth's cabin in summer, before the porch sagged and the weeds climbed the steps. The roof looked tired even then, but the windows held light. She turned it over. Grandma Ruth's handwriting waited on the back. "Come here when the noise gets too loud." No date, no explanation, just that. Martha sat very still. Outside, the highway hummed. Inside the car, something in her chest shifted. Not hope, not yet, but direction. She could almost hear Grandma Ruth's voice from years ago, low, steady, and sure. "Come here. Not when you understand, not when you are ready. Just come here." Martha looked toward the dark road leading south into the Ozark hills. She had avoided that cabin for years because it held too much memory. Now memory was the only thing that had not changed the locks. She started the car. The engine coughed once, then caught. And as Martha pulled away from the closed diner, she did not notice the small line written near the postcard stamp. A line half faded by age. A line Grandma Ruth had squeezed into the corner like she was afraid someone else might read it first. "If you come alone, look behind the firewood shelf." The road into the Ozark hills seemed narrower than Martha remembered. Tree branches leaned over the pavement like tired arms. Gravel popped beneath the tires. Every few miles, the headlights caught an old mailbox, a fence post, or the pale flash of a deer standing too still near the ditch. Martha drove slowly, not because she was afraid of the road, because each turn brought back something she had buried. Grandma Ruth's laugh on summer evenings, the smell of biscuits cooling near the stove, barefoot feet on the porch boards, rain tapping the tin roof while Ruth hummed old hymns under her breath. By the time Martha reached the cabin road, the sky had gone dark blue. The last strip of daylight sat low behind the trees, then the cabin appeared, small, crooked, almost swallowed by weeds. One porch step had cracked down the middle. The front window was clouded with dust. A strip of gutter hung loose near the roof line, moving slightly whenever the wind pushed through the trees. Raymond had called it worthless. For one tired second, Martha wondered if he had been right. Then her headlights swept across the porch and caught the old rocking chair still sitting beside the door. Grandma Ruth's chair, weathered gray now, empty, waiting. Martha turned off the engine, but she did not get out right away. The silence outside felt thick, not peaceful, watchful. She reached for the postcard on the passenger seat and turned it over again. "If you come alone, look behind the firewood shelf." The words looked weaker in the dim light, but they were there. Martha had missed them before, or maybe she had not been ready to see them. She stepped out carefully, her knees stiff from the long drive. The night air smelled of damp leaves, old pine, and cold earth. Somewhere far off, an owl called once. The cabin key was still hidden where Grandma Ruth had always kept it, inside a chipped blue flower pot under the porch. Martha found it with her fingers before she could see it. That almost undid her. Somebody had changed the locks at her own house that morning. But Grandma Ruth's cabin still opened the old way. The door resisted at first, swollen from weather. Then it gave with a low wooden groan. Martha stepped inside. Dust floated through the beam of her flashlight. The air smelled closed up, but not rotten, just old. Like quilts in a cedar chest, like rooms that had waited too long for footsteps. She moved through the front room slowly. The sofa was covered with a sheet. A chipped mug sat upside down near the sink. Grandma Ruth's Bible rested on the small table beside the window. Martha did not touch it yet. The postcard had not mentioned the Bible. It had mentioned the firewood shelf. She found it near the stone fireplace, stacked with a few brittle logs and a rusted lantern. Behind it, the wallboards were darkened from years of smoke. At first she saw nothing, only dust, cobwebs, and old nail bent sideways. Then her flashlight caught a thin scratch on the wall behind the shelf. Not random, a mark. 3 short lines carved into the wood. Martha leaned closer. Below the marks was a small gap where one board did not sit flush. Her heartbeat changed. She set the flashlight on the mantel with shaking hands and pulled at the board. It did not move. She tried again. Still nothing. Then she noticed the bent nail. It was not holding the board in place. It was pointing down. Martha followed it with the light. On the floor beneath the shelf, half hidden under dust, was a narrow brass key. Not the cabin key. Smaller, older, wrapped with a strip of faded thread. Martha picked it up and saw 2 letters scratched into the metal. M.W. Martha Whitcomb. Her name before Raymond. For a moment, the whole cabin seemed to hold its breath. Then something shifted behind the wallboard. A soft slide of wood against wood, as if Grandma Ruth's secret had finally heard her come home. Martha stood in front of the fireplace with the tiny brass key in her palm. For a few seconds, she did not move. The cabin was silent around her, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like someone had left a hand on her shoulder and was waiting for her to turn around. She looked at the letters scratched into the key again. M.W. Martha Whitcomb. The name she had not used in decades. The name that existed before Raymond's papers, before his cabinet, before every signature that slowly boxed her in. Her hand tightened around the key. Then the wallboard gave another soft click. This time, Martha saw it. A narrow seam opened beside the fireplace, so thin she would have missed it if the flashlight had not caught the shadow. She placed her fingers against the edge and pulled. The board loosened, dust fell in a quiet sheet. Behind it was a shallow space cut into the wall, not large, not dramatic, just big enough to hide something meant to survive time. Inside sat a sealed envelope wrapped in faded wax paper. Martha reached for it slowly. The paper felt dry and fragile beneath her fingers. On the front, written in Grandma Ruth's careful hand, was a name Martha had not seen in that exact form since she was young. Martha May Whitcomb Hart, not just Hart. Not only the name Raymond had used when he needed her signature, Whitcomb too. The name Grandma Ruth had never let disappear. Martha lowered herself onto the old braided rug in front of the hearth. Her knees ached, but she barely noticed. The envelope rested in her lap like something alive. For a moment, she thought about putting it back. Not because she did not want the truth, because some truths change the room the second they enter it. Outside, wind brushed against the cabin wall. Inside, Martha slid one finger under the flap. The first page trembled as she unfolded it. Grandma Ruth's handwriting leaned slightly to the right, just as it always had on birthday cards, recipe notes, and grocery lists pinned to the refrigerator. But this was not a recipe, this was not a birthday wish. The first sentence was only 12 words, and it took the strength out of Martha's body. I prayed I was wrong about him, but I prepared in case I wasn't. Martha stopped breathing. Her eyes moved over the sentence again, then again. The room blurred. Not because the words were cruel, because they were kind in a way Martha was not ready to receive. Grandma Ruth had known, not guessed, not imagined, known enough to prepare. Martha pressed the letter against her chest and bent forward until her forehead almost touched her knees. No sound came out at first, only a small broken breath, then another. Then the kind of crying she had not allowed herself in Raymond's driveway. Not loud, not dramatic, private, old, deep. The letter slid partly from her hands, but she caught it before it touched the floor. She forced herself to keep reading. Grandma Ruth wrote that she had watched Raymond for years, noticed how he spoke over Martha, noticed how questions about love turned into questions about ownership, noticed how Martha's voice grew smaller whenever papers appeared on the kitchen table. Then came the line that made Martha cover her mouth. "If this letter has found you, then my fear became your pain." Martha shut her eyes. All those years she had told herself Grandma Ruth worried too much. All those times she smiled to keep peace. All those evenings Raymond said she was confused, dramatic, forgetful, or too emotional to understand business. And here, in this abandoned cabin, written by a woman long gone, was proof that someone had seen the pattern clearly. The letter did not offer comfort first. It offered instruction. Grandma Ruth wrote that Martha must not call Raymond, must not tell relatives who might repeat things without meaning harm, must not assume the house was the whole story. There was more. Martha sat straighter. Her tears had not dried, but her hands became steadier. The next paragraph mentioned the hearth, the board beneath the old firewood shelf, the metal box wrapped in oilcloth, and a name Martha had not heard since Grandma Ruth's funeral, Alden Price. Grandma wrote that if Martha ever reached the cabin alone, she should find the box first, then call Alden before speaking to anyone else. Martha looked toward the firewood shelf. The old logs sat stacked in the dark. A loose floorboard waited beneath them. For the first time that night, the cabin did not feel like a memory. It felt like a witness. Martha folded the letter carefully, but before she slipped it back into the envelope, she saw one final line near the bottom of the page, smaller than the rest, almost hidden. Raymond asked about the land before he ever asked if you were happy. Martha's tears stopped. The pain inside her shifted into something colder, something awake. She turned toward the hearth and reached for the first log. The first log came away easily, so did the second. But the third was heavier than it looked, swollen from years of damp air and settled dust. Martha pulled it free with both hands and set it beside the fireplace. A thin gray spider hurried across the stone. Martha barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. There, beneath the firewood shelf, one board sat lower than the others. Not enough for a stranger to notice, just enough for someone who had been told where to look. Grandma Ruth had always been like that. She never shouted the truth. She left it where only the right person would search. Martha knelt slowly. Her body protested, but she ignored it. The little brass key rested beside her on the hearth, its faded thread curled like an old ribbon. She pressed her fingers against the uneven board. It shifted, not much, just a breath. She looked around for something to pry it open with, then found an iron poker leaning near the fireplace. The handle was cold in her hand. She wedged the tip into the narrow crack and pushed. The board groaned. For one frightening second, the sound seemed too loud. Martha froze. Outside, the woods answered with silence. No engine, no footsteps, no Raymond. only the wind moving through the trees. She pushed again. This time the board lifted. Underneath was a dark space lined with old cloth. Martha lowered the flashlight and saw something wrapped in oilcloth, tied with twine, tucked carefully between two floor joists. Her breath caught. It was not large, about the size of a shoebox, but it had the weight of something that had waited a long time to be found. She pulled it out and set it on the rug. The twine broke under her fingers. The oilcloth unfolded with a dry crackle. Inside was a small metal box, dark green, its corners scratched silver from age. A lock sat on the front. Martha reached for the brass key. Her hand shook once before she steadied it. The key slid in, turned, clicked. The sound was soft, but it changed everything. Inside the box there was no money, no jewelry, no miracle wrapped in velvet, only paper, stacks of it, folded, labeled, protected from moisture in clear sleeves. Martha stared at them for a moment, and something in her chest sank. Paper had taken her house. Now paper was waiting in Grandma Ruth's box. She almost laughed at the cruelty of it. Then she saw the first label, Cabin Deed, original copy. The second, Survey Map, South Acreage. The third, Trust Documents, Martha May Whitcomb. Her fingers stopped moving. There it was again, Whitcomb. The name Raymond never used unless he was angry. The name he treated like something Martha had outgrown once she became his wife. Grandma Ruth had kept it alive in ink. Martha pulled out the trust papers, but the language blurred quickly. She recognized only pieces. Beneficiary, protected property, separate interest, successor contact. Then she found a business card clipped to the top page. Alden Price, attorney at law, West Plains, Missouri. On the back, Grandma Ruth had written one sentence, "He knows enough. Tell him the rest." Martha sat back on her heels. The cabin seemed smaller now, but not weaker. Closer, like the walls had leaned in to listen. Below the trust papers were maps of the surrounding land. Red pencil marks circled a narrow access road behind the cabin. Another mark traced a wooded stretch near the creek. One note mentioned timber. Another mentioned a county easement. Martha did not understand it all, but she understood this much. Raymond had called the cabin worthless because he had wanted her to believe it. At the bottom of the box, beneath the maps, lay a thin folder tied with black string. Unlike the others, it had no neat legal label. Only 3 words in Grandma Ruth's handwriting. Raymond, questions asked. Martha's mouth went dry. She opened it carefully. Inside were notes, dates, short descriptions, a phone call after church, a visit when Martha was not present, a question about whether spouses could claim inherited land, a remark about old women not needing extra property. The words were plain, but together they formed something ugly. Not one mistake, a pattern. Then Martha found a folded county record tucked inside the back of the folder. A parcel number had been circled twice. Beside it, in typed print, was Raymond Hart's name listed under an inquiry request from years earlier. Martha stared at the page. Raymond had not stumbled into her loss. He had studied the edges of it. Her hand moved toward Alden Price's card, but before she could pick it up, headlights swept across the cabin window. Martha went still. The light moved once across the wall, then disappeared. A car had turned off the road, and it was coming up the cabin drive. Martha did not reach for the lamp. She reached for the metal box. The headlights crawled across the cabin wall again, slow and pale, cutting through the dark like someone searching for movement. Martha gathered the papers with both hands, not neatly, not the way Grandma Ruth had kept them, just fast enough to get them out of sight. The trust documents, the county record, the folder with Raymond's name. She pushed everything back into the metal box, closed the lid, and held it against her chest. Outside, tires rolled over gravel, then stopped. The cabin went quiet. Martha stood frozen beside the fireplace, listening to the engine idle. Her body felt 75 years old in that moment. Her knees ached. Her breath came thin. But her mind was suddenly clear. Grandma Ruth's letter had warned her, "Do not call Raymond. Do not tell anyone too soon. Call Alden Price." A car door opened. Martha moved toward the front window, keeping herself away from the glass. Through a crack in the curtain, she saw an old pickup truck sitting in the drive. The driver stepped out slowly. Not Raymond, a woman. Small, bent at the shoulders, wearing a heavy cardigan over a house dress. She carried a flashlight in one hand and a brown paper bag in the other. Martha did not recognize her at first. Then, the woman raised the flashlight toward the porch and called out, not loudly, but with the confidence of someone who knew the woods did not need shouting. "Martha Hart?" Martha's fingers tightened around the box. The woman came no closer. "Don't be scared," she said. "I'm Mabel Carter. I lived down the road from Ruth for 40 years. Martha opened the door only a few inches. The night air slipped in cold. Mabel stood at the bottom of the porch steps, her gray hair pinned back, her face lined from weather and years. She looked past Martha just once, toward the fireplace, then she looked back. "I saw a light," Mabel said. "Figured if you were Ruth's girl, you might not have eaten." She lifted the paper bag. Inside was a jar of soup wrapped in a dish towel. That small kindness almost hurt more than suspicion. Martha did not invite her in right away. She had learned in one terrible day that trust could be expensive. Mabel seemed to understand. She set the bag on the porch rail. "Your grandmother told me something once," she said. "If Martha ever comes here alone at night, make sure she calls Alden before morning." The name moved through Martha like a match struck in a dark room. Alden, not just written on a card, spoken by someone living. Martha opened the door wider. Mabel did not ask what Martha had found. She did not ask why her eyes were red. She only nodded toward the phone on the wall near the kitchen. "Line still works if the bill got paid," she said. Ruth kept things that way. The old phone looked dead at first. Dust covered the receiver. The cord was curled tight, yellowed with age. Martha lifted it and listened. A dial tone hummed. Thin, faint, alive. Mabel gave her the number from memory. Martha dialed with one finger, each click of the rotary wheel sounding louder than it should have. The office was closed. Of course it was. But after the third ring, an answering service picked up. Martha gave her name. Then Grandma Ruth's. Then the word trust. There was a pause, a long one. Then the woman on the line said Mr. Price would be notified. Martha expected nothing until morning. But 22 minutes later, the phone rang so sharply that both women flinched. Martha lifted the receiver. A man's voice came through, older than she expected, careful and awake. "This is Alden Price." Martha closed her eyes. For the first time all day, someone said her name like it mattered. She told him about the letter, the metal box, the folder, the county record. Alden did not interrupt. But when Martha said Raymond's name was tied to a parcel inquiry, the silence changed. It became the kind of silence people keep when they already feared the answer. Then Alden spoke slowly. "Martha, listen to me carefully." Mabel looked toward the window. The woods outside were black. Alden continued. "Do not leave that cabin tonight. Do not bring those papers to town. And whatever you do, do not let Raymond know what you found." Martha's hand went cold around the receiver. Before she could ask why, Mabel turned off the porch light. The porch light went dark. For one long second, the cabin disappeared into itself. Only the moon held the edges of the windows. Martha stood beside the kitchen wall, the phone receiver still pressed to her ear, listening to Alden Price breathe on the other end of the line. Mabel Carter did not move. She stayed near the curtain, one hand resting against the old wooden frame, her face turned toward the black trees beyond the porch. Then Alden spoke again. "Is someone outside?" Martha looked at Mabel. Mabel shook her head once. "Not yes, not no, just wait." Martha lowered her voice. "I don't know." Alden was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Lock the door. Put the papers somewhere only you can reach. I'll come at first light." Martha wanted to ask him everything. Why Raymond's name was on that county inquiry, why Grandma Ruth had been so careful, why a man who had already taken her house would care about an old cabin buried in the hills. But Alden gave her one instruction before the call ended. Before morning, look for dates. Ruth cared about dates. If she kept records, that's where she would have left you a way in. The line clicked. Martha stood there with the receiver in her hand, hearing only the dial tone. Dates. The words settled over the room, not memories, not feelings, dates. Mabel turned from the window. "If Ruth was scared enough to hide papers in the wall," she said softly, she was careful enough to prove why. Together, they moved without turning on the overhead lights. Mabel used a small flashlight. Martha carried the metal box to Grandma Ruth's writing desk. The desk drawer was still locked. The little brass key marked MW did not fit it. Martha tried once, then again. Nothing. Mabel pointed the flashlight toward the side of the desk. Ruth had a habit, she whispered. She never kept the right key near the lock. Martha ran her fingers beneath the drawer. Dust clung to her skin, then she felt tape, old tape, brittle at the edges. She pulled it loose and found a flat silver key stuck beneath the wood. The drawer opened with a dry scrape. Inside was not clutter, it was order. A small calendar from years ago, rubber-banded receipts, a church bulletin folded around a hospital parking slip, a pharmacy bag with a date printed across the top. Martha's throat tightened. Not from sadness this time, from recognition. This was the year Raymond had pushed hardest with the home papers. The year he had said they needed to get serious about the future. Martha opened the old calendar. Grandma Ruth's handwriting filled the squares in small, careful lines. Doctor appointment. Tax office. Mabel brought tomatoes. Martha came. Martha stopped. There it was. The same date printed on one of Raymond's most important documents. The same date Martha supposedly signed a paper giving him more control over the house. Grandma Ruth's calendar said something else. Martha here all day. Brought soup. Rain by noon. Raymond called twice, did not answer. Martha read it once, then again. Her mouth went dry. She had not been at the bank that day. She had not been sitting across from Raymond at the kitchen table. She had been here, with Grandma Ruth, in this cabin. Mabel reached into the folder and pulled out the hospital parking receipt. Same date. Then the pharmacy slip. Same date. Then a handwritten note tucked inside the church bulletin. Same date. 3 small pieces of paper, all saying what Martha's memory had been too bruised to defend. She had not signed that document when Raymond said she did. Mabel's flashlight trembled slightly. Martha, she whispered, that's not pressure anymore. Martha looked at the legal copy from the metal box. Her name sat at the bottom of the page. The signature looked like hers at first glance, but now, under the weak beam of light, it seemed too smooth, too careful, like someone had practiced being her. For the first time since the locks changed, Martha did not feel only wounded. She felt dangerous to the lie. She reached for Alden's business card and placed it beside the calendar, the receipt, and the signed document. A pattern formed on the desk, not emotion, evidence. Then Mabel's eyes shifted toward the window again. This time, Martha heard it too. Not wind, not branches. A low engine somewhere down the road, slowing near the cabin drive. Mabel switched off the flashlight. And in the sudden dark, Martha saw a pale glow sweep once across the trees. Someone was coming back. The engine stopped before it reached the cabin. That was what made Martha's skin tighten. A person who belonged there would have driven all the way up. A neighbor would have parked where the gravel widened. A stranger would have kept the headlights on. But whoever sat down the road had killed the engine in the dark. Mabel Carter stayed beside the window, barely breathing. Martha stood near Grandma Ruth's desk with the papers spread before her like a truth too large to hide quickly. The calendar, the receipt, the pharmacy slip, the document with Martha's name at the bottom. For 1 second, panic rose in her chest. Then her eyes fell on Grandma Ruth's letter. Do not let Raymond know what you found. Martha moved, not fast, carefully. She gathered the papers in the same order. Alden would need them. Mabel opened the bottom drawer of the desk and lifted out a flour sack folded beneath old dish towels. Ruth hid silver there during the war, Mabel whispered. No one ever checked the plain things. Martha slid the documents inside. The metal box went beneath the loose floorboard, but the folder with Raymond's county inquiry stayed with her. She tucked it under her sweater, flat against her ribs, not because she knew why, because something in her refused to let that page out of reach. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps on the cabin door, too polite, too measured. Martha did not answer. The knock came again. Martha? Raymond's voice, calm, almost gentle. Mabel's face hardened in the dark. Martha felt the old instinct rise inside her, the one that wanted to explain herself before she had even done wrong. But she stayed still. Raymond spoke through the door. I know you're in there. Your car is outside. Martha looked toward the window. His headlights were off now. The moon showed the outline of his truck near the trees. He had parked far enough from the porch that no one passing the road would notice him. That small choice told Martha more than his words did. Raymond did not want to be seen. "Martha," he said again, "I'm not here to fight." That was how he always began, not angry, reasonable, as if every cruel thing became harmless when spoken softly. "I heard you came out here," he continued. "People are worried. You shouldn't be alone in this place at night." Martha almost laughed. People. He always brought invisible people with him when he wanted control. People are saying. People are worried. People think you're confused. Mabel stepped closer and whispered, "You don't have to open it." But Martha knew something now. If she stayed silent, he would keep speaking through the door until his voice filled the cabin, until the walls felt like his again. So she turned the lock, only the top one, then opened the door the width of the chain. Raymond stood on the porch in a dark jacket, his hair neatly combed, his face arranged into concern. But his eyes moved too quickly, past Martha, over her shoulder, toward the fireplace, toward the desk, toward the room where Grandma Ruth had kept what he never found. "You look tired," he said. Martha did not answer. Raymond gave a small sigh, the kind meant to make her feel difficult. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're upset, you're not thinking clearly. And now some old neighbor is probably filling your head with stories." Mabel did not move from the shadows. Raymond leaned slightly toward the gap in the door. "Come back to town with me. We can talk somewhere. Normal." The word landed cold. Normal was the kitchen table, where he folded pages back and pointed to signature lines. Normal was his locked cabinet. Normal was a house key that no longer worked. Martha looked at him through the chain. "No." Raymond blinked, just once, but it was enough. He had expected tears, questions, maybe pleading, not that one small word. His jaw tightened. "Martha, don't make this embarrassing." There he was, not concerned now, exposed. Martha felt the folder under her sweater, pressing against her side like a second heartbeat. "What are you afraid I'll find?" she asked. Raymond's eyes changed. Only for a breath. But Martha saw it. Fear. Then his gaze dropped to her sweater, as if he knew something was hidden there. His voice lowered. "You don't understand what you're getting into." For the first time in all their years together, Martha did not shrink from that tone. She closed the door. Slowly, deliberately, the chain slid out of sight between them. Raymond stood on the other side for several seconds without moving. Then his boots crossed the porch. The truck door opened. The engine started. But before he drove away, Martha heard one more sound, not from outside, from inside the cabin. Mabel had opened Grandma Ruth's old desk drawer again, and in her hand was a sealed envelope Martha had not seen before. On the front, in Ruth's handwriting, were 4 words, "For when Raymond comes." Mabel held the envelope like it had been waiting for that exact night. "For when Raymond comes." The words were written in Grandma Ruth's steady hand, not rushed, not frightened, prepared. Outside, Raymond's truck backed down the cabin drive. The engine faded into the trees, but the silence he left behind stayed in the room. Martha stood near the desk, one hand still pressed against her side where she had hidden the folder. Her body was trembling now, not while Raymond was at the door after. That was how fear worked sometimes. It waited until the danger walked away, then reminded the body what it had survived. Mabel placed the envelope on Grandma Ruth's writing desk. "This was taped under the back of the drawer," she said. "Ruth always saved the hardest truth for the right hour." Martha sat down slowly and opened it. Inside was one folded page and a smaller sealed note addressed to Alden Price. She read the page first. "If Raymond comes to the cabin, it means he knows you are close." Martha stopped. The old room seemed to tighten around her. Grandma Ruth had written that Raymond had visited the cabin twice when Martha was not there. The first time, he asked polite questions about land boundaries. The second time, he asked whether property left to a married woman could ever become part of a husband's claim. He smiled when he asked it. That was the part Ruth remembered. Then came the line that made Martha's fingers go cold. "A man looking for paper is usually afraid of what paper can prove." Martha placed the page flat on the desk. For years, Raymond had made her feel emotional whenever she asked questions. But Grandma Ruth had not been emotional. She had been observant. And now her observations had become evidence. By sunrise, Alden Price arrived in a dark sedan with a leather briefcase and tired eyes. Beside him was Nora Bell, his legal assistant, carrying a scanner, folders, and a thermos of coffee. Alden stepped into the cabin and removed his hat, not casually, respectfully. "This was Ruth's place," he said. Martha nodded. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Nora cleared the desk. The cabin became an office. The calendar was placed beside the hospital receipt, the pharmacy slip beside the disputed document, the county inquiry beside Grandma Ruth's notes. Mabel gave her statement at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from. Alden read the sealed note from Ruth near the window. When he finished, he folded it once and looked at Martha. "She did not guess," he said. "She documented." That word changed something. Documented. It meant Martha was not standing on memory alone. She had dates, records, witnesses. A pattern Raymond could not soften with a calm voice. Over the next several weeks, the quiet fight began. Alden filed requests. Nora scanned every page. Martha signed statements with her own hand, slowly, clearly, never letting anyone rush her again. Some days were hard. There were meetings where Raymond's attorney suggested. Martha was confused. There were forms that made her feel small again. There were moments when she sat in Alden's office bathroom with cold water on her wrists, whispering to herself that she could still leave. But each time she returned to the chair. Not because she was fearless. Because Grandma Ruth had not gone through all that trouble for Martha to disappear at the first hard question. The strongest meeting happened in a plain conference room in downtown West Plains. Beige walls. A long table, a pitcher of water nobody touched. Raymond sat across from Martha in a pressed shirt, his hands folded like a man waiting for others to waste his time. At first he did not look worried. Then Alden began. He laid out the disputed signing date. Then Grandma Ruth's calendar. Then the hospital parking receipt. Then the pharmacy slip. Then Mabel's signed statement. Then the county record, showing Raymond had asked about cabin land years before he claimed he knew nothing about it. Piece by piece, the room changed. Raymond's face did not collapse. Men like Raymond rarely give people that satisfaction. But his confidence left him in small ways. A blink held too long, a jaw tightened, a hand moved from the table to his lap. His attorney leaned toward him and whispered. Raymond did not answer. For once, there was no easy sentence waiting in his mouth. No, you signed it. No, you worry too much. No, you don't understand. Martha looked at him across the table. She did not feel triumphant. She felt clear. That was better. Alden did not promise the old house would come back exactly as it had been. Real life was not that neat. Some damage could be challenged. Some could be settled. Some could only be named out loud. But Raymond's control broke. A settlement followed. Then a corrected filing. Then financial protection Martha had not imagined possible. And the cabin Raymond once mocked became the ground beneath her future. The land had quiet value. Timber along the back ridge, access near the old county road, a protected stretch by the creek. Martha did not sell the cabin. She would not. She allowed a careful timber agreement on one section. She leased a narrow access strip. She kept the cabin, the porch, the fireplace, and the wallboard that had hidden the first letter. With the first money that came through, she repaired the front step. Then the roof. Then the windows. She hung pale blue curtains in the kitchen because Grandma Ruth used to say blue made a small room feel like it could breathe. The old house key went into the drawer of Ruth's writing desk. Not the little key marked MW. The other one. The key Raymond had made useless. Martha kept it there as proof that a locked door is not always an ending. Sometimes it is a direction. Months later, women began coming to the cabin, not crowds. Just one or two at a time, a widow from church with tired eyes. A retired nurse carrying divorce papers in a grocery bag. A woman from the county senior center who said she only came for coffee, then cried before the cup cooled. Martha did not give speeches. She did not tell them to be strong. She gave them a chair by the window, a clean table, a warm mug, and the quiet permission to be believed before they had to prove anything. One afternoon, Mabel watched Martha set cups on the table and smiled. Ruth would like this, she said. Martha looked toward the fireplace. The wallboard had been repaired, but she had left one small mark visible, not for guests. For herself. She knew, Martha said. Mabel nodded. She did, and that was the part that still broke Martha sometimes. Not Raymond, not the lost years, not even the house. It was the thought of Grandma Ruth sitting alone at that table, saving receipts, hiding letters, writing Martha's full name on envelopes, loving her carefully enough to prepare a future she might never be thanked for. Raymond had taken a house, but Grandma Ruth had protected a life. And in the end, that was what he never understood. A person can change locks, twist papers, use love like leverage, but truth has a way of waiting for the one person brave enough to come looking. Sometimes behind a wallboard, sometimes inside an old drawer, sometimes in the handwriting of someone who loved you before you knew how much danger you were in. And sometimes, when the world thinks an older woman has nothing left, she is only one hidden letter away from standing again. If Martha's story made you angry for every older woman who has been ignored, like this video before you go. And subscribe now, because when stories like hers disappear, people like Raymond keep counting on silence. Tell me in the comments, would you have confronted Raymond, or opened Grandma Ruth's letter first and kept quiet until the proof was safe? Thank you for watching.